Welcome to the Darkstream. Voxday, voxday.net, and unauthorized.tv. The DLive chat is live. The unauthorized chat is live. And super chats are active, although for some reason there we go. Having a little trouble getting the DLive chat set up properly, but could be a bit of a historic moment tonight. Told that audio is good, told that video is good, and not very long ago, as you can see on the blog and on Social Galactic, it was reported that the long-awaited NATO Ukrainian offensive has finally gotten underway. And if we have a look here, it says, this is from Russia Today. Ukrainian forces have attacked the Russian troops along 5 sections of the front line in Donbass during their large-scale offensive, the Russian Defense Ministry said in the early hours of Monday. According to the Ministry of Defense, the assault began on Sunday morning. The enemy's goal was to breach our defenses in what they assumed was the most vulnerable section of the front line, the ministry said in a statement carried by the Russian media. So, what this indicates is that we may finally be approaching phase 2 of the opening scene of World War III. We've been seeing a lot of little signs around the edges. There's something big going down with the OPEC nations. I think that those things are probably more economic in mind, or more focused on the global economy. One of the Saudi ministers actually said, you wouldn't believe what we are talking about. So whatever it is, they certainly believe it to be significant and important. Eincrew, I think, has it backwards. He says, expectation the Ukrainian offensive will begin 4 hours after the Russian offensive. I disagree. That's not the usual pattern. The Russian pattern, and I was reading Marshal Zhukov's memoirs recently from World War II. If you look at, I think perhaps a informative situation to look at here was the Russian response to the German offensive known as Case Blue. Case Blue is the German attack that bogged down at Stalingrad. And on a micro scale, I assume that's somewhat similar to what we're looking at here. If this is the NATO forces taking their best shot with the remnants of their Ukrainian proxy army, what I strongly suspect is that the Russians have what they call a counteroffensive planned. A counteroffensive is not a counterattack. A counteroffensive is basically similar to an offensive, but with the idea that you wait until the enemy has expended its initial forces. Also, the Battle of Kursk is correct. What the Russians like to do, and I suspect they're going to be able to do it today, at least in terms of the public awareness, possibly not in terms of what the Pentagon actually knows. But typically what the Russians like to do is they like to engage in counteroffensives after the enemy's offensive has worn down. And then they like to surprise the enemy with an attack in much greater force than the enemy is prepared for in any way. The Germans couldn't believe that after this vicious, what was it? It began in June, and so Case Blue began in June, and then they ran out of steam in November, and then they were under the impression that yeah, they were running out of steam, but they thought the Russians were too. And then the Russians hit them with a counteroffensive that consisted of 1.1 million troops, 13,000 artillery pieces, and like 800 tanks. And the reason that the Germans couldn't believe that is because they thought that the Russians were throwing everything they had into their defense. But the Russians are very dedicated to maintaining strategic reserves and not only not using everything they can on an initial offensive, but also not using everything they can on defensive situations. And if you think about that, isn't that what we already know that they've been doing? They use the Chechens as their shock forces in Mariupol. They use Wagner as their shock forces in Bakhmut. And where are the Chechens now? They've had plenty of time to restock and prepare. Where are all of the 300,000 mobilized regulars that have been brought in over the last year? Where are their elite regular forces? Now, obviously, my initial opinion was that they were saving them in case they needed to go head-to-head with NATO. But if you look at the combination of Russian history and the general, what is proven to be the general unpreparedness of the NATO forces as well as the NATO equipment, I suspect that the Russians don't believe that they need to save those forces specifically for that. And so I'm not saying this is going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen. The Russian Strategic Command does not consult with me or tell me what they're intending to do. But I've read a lot of military history. I've been educated at the feet of some of the great military strategists of history, Martin van Creveld and William S. Lind. In fact, I was just talking to Mr. Lind about this 2-3 nights ago. And, I'm also a longtime war gamer. And so, I have some basic information on this sort of thing that gives me perhaps a little bit more of a basis to analyze these things. And if you look at Operation Uranus, if you look at Kursk, and then you note the fact that the Russians have been reserving a lot of their forces, they're going to use them sometime. And my thought is that there's a very good chance of a massive Russian counteroffensive after the Ukrainian offensive wears itself out. Is this all about the petrodollar? No. Materialists believe it's all about the petrodollar. It's partially about the petrodollar, but it's much more about, it's also partially about the maintenance of Clown World, the dominance of European, or the US continuing to dominate and essentially control the European nations. But more than anything, it is a spiritual war. More than anything, it is a war of the sovereign nations, Russia, China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, versus the satanic empire that we call Clown World. You know, Putin has come right out and told us this. He's come right out and said, you know, this is a battle of the Christian Orthodox Church against the empire of lies. And I understand that some people don't believe in these things. Even a lot of people who are Christians and believe in these things don't connect geopolitical and geostrategic events to the spiritual world. They should. You know, we'll have to see. You know, I was thinking that maybe it's not possible for the Russians to build up a massive amount of forces that would take NATO by surprise because of all of the satellites and all the information that is now accessible that wasn't accessible 70 years ago. But we were also told that the Russians were going to run out of ammunition in 2 weeks, about 10 months ago. Now, personally, I think that they were just lying through the media. But on the other hand, some of the actions of the NATO militaries seem to suggest that they actually believed it. So perhaps their information is actually that bad. Blitzkrieg Bear says they may be retarded enough to be surprised. That's possible too. It doesn't matter how good your information is if you don't believe it. You know, it doesn't matter how good your sources are if you refuse to give them any credibility. So anyhow, I think that we are at an important nexus here. I think that it's very common for wars to move along very slowly and then very quickly. People tend to forget that for nearly 9 months after World War II began, it was actually known as the phony war, because nobody was really seeing any effects of it, seeing anything happen. But, the battle for Ukraine is not the war. It's just the first battle in the larger one. And we're seeing new fronts opening up. You've got the situation in Kosovo. You've got the situation in Peru. You've got the situation in the Middle East. You've got which is both related, Iran and Saudi Arabia and a couple other countries are setting up a naval force of their own, which means that they're not necessarily going to rely upon the U.S. to protect their oil shipments anymore. China's Navy is now bigger than the U.S. Navy. And, they're desperately casting around for, it's kind of funny. I've been talking about industrial capacity being the only significant determinant. Well, the geniuses who are the strategists for the U.S. military have just figured out that they don't have the manufacturing capacity to keep pace with China. I mean, this is the U.S. talking, and they openly say we can only produce one warship in the time that China can produce 3. It's probably not even that good. And of course, this doesn't even get into the fact that they can't train up ship captains that are capable of navigating the ship without crashing into something because of the equalitarianism and the social justice that dictates that ship captains be women and blacks and Hispanics and anything but a meritocracy. Nebula says, I know 0 Americans that want to fight Russia. Absolutely. Which is why, if it is decided that the U.S. military is going to get actively involved, there's going to be 1 or more very serious false flags that will be blamed on the Russians. That's the method that's been used to get America into war since the Spanish-American War back in the 19th century. So I don't see any chance that there isn't a significant false flag blamed on Russia in the United States within the next 12 months. And you would think that people wouldn't fall for it. I warned people not to fall for it, not to fall for the Patriot Act in my very first column for WorldNet Daily that I wrote on, that was published on September 12th, 2001. My first 2 columns were literally telling people, don't fall for this. Don't accept the restriction of your rights in the name of getting even for the 2 towers. Even a lot of people here fell for it at the time. They wouldn't now, but they did back then. Sam says, hell, they tried to blame Nord Stream on Russia. Yeah, that was just totally absurd. Yordamo says, good time to stay out of big famous cities. Yeah, they're not gonna do it in New York or Washington D.C. or Los Angeles, but which of course is just going to be evidence that it's not the Russians involved. When Clown World wants to get Americans stirred up, they are much more likely to focus on something that's either iconic or something that's in the Middle West. They want to make sure everybody's involved, because at this point, I think they understand that half of America would celebrate the vaporization of New York City or Hollywood. But anyhow, I just wanted to note that it's reported that the offensive is beginning. I don't know, whether we can regard that as true or not, but it is being reported, and it's not just being reported by the Ukrainians, it's being reported by the Russians as well. So I think that we can take it reasonably seriously. Kontiki says they need to motivate MAGA to join a fight. Absolutely they do. That's why they ditched the pride stuff for the military very rapidly. The Clown World strategists understand that they've gone too far. And the timing is not ideal, to say the least. I also think it's a little bit ominous that China has gone radio silent. China's not talking to their U.S. equivalents anymore. I think we're going to see some very big developments coming out of both Saudi Arabia and China coincidental with whatever Russia decides to do. Because Russia has a broad spectrum of options. It wouldn't be out of the range of possibility for Russia to drop a couple Kinzhals and other missiles on London. UK's Storm Shadow missiles are being fired at Russia, not just into the Donbass, but into Russia proper. And they would be more than justified to go ahead and strike directly against the UK or its forces. I mean, another possibility would be that they sink a couple of English ships. John Buono says, Vox, do you think this is a continuation of the wars against Russia going back to Napoleon, the English Empire, and World War I, World War II, and the Cold War? Yes and no. Remember, Russia was occupied by the same people that are currently running the U.S. right now. So it's different. I don't think Napoleon was not clown world, in my opinion. So I don't see how that could relate. I don't think it goes back to the Mongol hordes and the Golden Horde either. Snow White Bear says, so do you want to work for China now? No, I don't want to work for China. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the Chinese. I admire Xi Jinping, and as it amuses Big Bear to no end, you might not unreasonably consider me to be a fanboy of Wang Hunin. There's not a lot of people that I look up to intellectually these days, but Wang Hunin is one of them. The degree to which he foresaw these things coming was astonishing. It's 20 years before I did. Cactus Eater Bear says, another mystery spy balloon. This one was Cyrillic on it. Maybe related to the upcoming false flag. I doubt it. I think they realize it's going to have to be a much bigger, it's going to have to be a bigger event than 9/11. It's going to have to be a bigger event than Oklahoma City. So, but to get back to working with China, we are actively working on opening up the Chinese market with some of our products. And I'm very focused on making sure that we're able to reach both halves of the Great Bifurcation, because the western half is going to be the smaller half. The West is already mostly behind the East when it comes to technology. A lot of people don't realize that yet. They still think that, they're, the scratch a Japanese car and it says Budweiser. I mean, they're still stuck on that. Bathory Bear said, could it be a triggered earthquake? It could be, but I don't think so, because it's got to be something that can be blamed convincingly on Russia. Nobody believes that Russia has HARP weapons. Nobody in the mainstream believes that the US has HARP weapons. So that doesn't make any sense. The Idaho Crusader says, no one in the U.S. wants to fight Russia. Lots of conservatives want a war with China, though. Which is just as absurd and just as ridiculous. The U.S. cannot defeat China. The U.S. cannot defeat Russia. It cannot be defeated by either one of them either. But the one thing that it could lose to is a actual BRICS military alliance. Because if Saudi Arabia and the rest of the world was to completely cut off the oil, and the US was forced to supply both itself and Europe, which means it would only supply itself, which means that they would lose Europe very quickly. You know, I think the US is already in danger of losing Mexico and South and Central America. Jordan says, what are the chances of a nuclear false flag? Every normie knows Putin bad and Russia has nukes. Well, unfortunately, I think that that is probably what has to be anticipated. I don't think that anything short of a reported nuclear attack on an American city would be sufficient to convince Americans to support a war with Russia. You know, what else would get people that angry or upset? I mean, maybe something like a Pearl Harbor, like, for example, some sort of faked missile strike on all the U.S. carriers. Lidumba says, have noticed an uptick in warmongering with the AI the last couple of weeks. Maybe something cybernetic. No, it's not going to be something cybernetic. Nobody cares. I mean, let me rephrase that. It's possible that there will be a false flag that will be well below the level of a fake nuclear attack, but if they do, it won't be effective. If they do, nobody will care. I mean, they could blame. They could announce that Joe Biden had been poisoned with, some radioactive element, and claim that the Russians had assassinated him, and that wouldn't happen. Powers Up Bear said, if Russians lost use of their phones for 3 days, that'd probably be enough. No, it wouldn't, because no one would buy that it was the Russians. Doesn't make sense. And again, I'm not saying that it would be an actual nuclear false flag. It would probably be done with, I think what would be suspicious is that the false flag would be too small to be an actual Russian nuke. Ladumba said, the nuclear thing would play into the Q narrative after all these years, the Hunt for Red October movie. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's probably going to be maybe an EMP attack. No, it's not. An EMP attack is not sufficient. Again, stop smart boying and think about what is going to make the people that you know all around you the good conservatives, the nice Christians, etc. What is capable of stirring them from both their natural torpor and their fear of the Russians and make them angry enough to want to go to war? It's got to be something that it's not going to be an EMP attack. It's not going to be, oh gee, my phone doesn't work. You know. Venma says it has to look good on TV. Exactly. No. No, again, it also has to be something that people would blame on Russia. If something happened to Donald Trump, absolutely no one is going to believe that it was blamed on Russia. Yordamon points out Pearl Harbor, 9/11, and now. Right. The fact that anyone would buy that anyone would nuke any U.S. city other than Los Angeles, New York City, and D.C. is sad. Well, yeah, that's true. That's true. You know, attack on Super Bowl? Possibly, but it's a long time till the Super Bowl. Is there anything we can do to push back against war? Yeah, talk to your friends, talk to your acquaintances, and make sure they understand if something happens, it's probably a false flag. We're very well inoculated against the rage that is supposed to be programmed into us because we're expecting it. No. I mean, again, Q1882 says, data leak or a short time without online digital conveniences. That's retarded. That's literally retarded. Nobody anywhere in the world is going to risk going to war with Russia over inconveniences, because war with Russia is going to create much greater inconveniences. Yeah, it is possible that they won't do it. They might not be. I mean, I have no doubt that this has been gamed out 1,000 times, and that there are strategical factions supporting it, and other ones saying, no, you can't do that. It's not going to work. You know, I'm a little bit skeptical. I think I'm a little bit skeptical that they will try to do anything. Just because people are so programmed to be afraid of nuclear war that I don't think that there's going to be support for, we have to hit them back. I think people are too afraid of the consequences. Aethersar says, the 101st taking major casualties in an attack? No. Nobody cares. Too many people know too much about the military. Too many people know too much about the equality, and they're like, hey, go ahead and let the black women fight. Um, also, remember that there's going to be a lot of pushback against whatever, they're going to blame it on the Russians, but the Russians are going to say, we didn't do it, and the rest of the world is going to say, yeah, they didn't do it. China's made it very, very clear they don't believe anything. Ego te absolvo, Q1882. He sends in a very generous super chat saying, paying my retardation away. Yeah, that could be the Darkstream grift. Pay your retardation away. Golden Gate Bridge seems more of a Chinese false flag. Yeah, that's definitely true. Also, who cares? Like, that's movie thinking, not military thinking. U.S. Army has been ramping up training and activity in Alaska. Oh, I have no doubt. Any chance that they may decide not to fight World War III and just focus on locking down the U.S.? Yeah, there is a very good chance of that, especially if Europe breaks free. I think that right now they're more concerned about hanging on to Europe. I think that they're probably threatening the European leaders. I mean, there's a greater chance that the U.S. is going to attack one of the Western European nations than actually attack Russia. Nebula says, it's going to be Switzerland. No one sits out World War III. It's not going to be Switzerland. Again, the goal is to get Americans to support a war. You need to, and this is what I mean by stop smart boying. I can tell when people are smart boying because they're not paying any attention whatsoever to the actual point. What you're doing is the equivalent of the read till offended, except in this case, it's read until you see false flag, and then you start just throwing false flag ideas out there, forgetting what the purpose of the specific false flag has to be. Iron Crew says, chat is just having fun speculating on bad stuff happening in the world. Well, if you think being pointless and retarded is fun, okay, go ahead. I'm not interested in that sort of thing. I'm interested in actually thinking about what the situation is and what the various possibilities are, and looking at it from the perspective of those who are actually involved. Cucumber, nice name by the way, throws in a generous super chat himself saying, paying my retardation away, clear the brain fog, for I have much retardation in my noodle. Well, you two are forgiven. The retardation is gone. But yeah, I agree with Idaho Crusader. When you think about this, when you look at this, the event would have to be absolutely huge. Even a city being blown up might not be enough. I agree. I absolutely agree. Blitzkrieg Bear said the Statue of Liberty is on the table. Deus Ex pre-programmed it. I think that that's more likely than the Golden Gate Bridge, frankly. But, and again, I could be wrong. This might not be the nexus. This supposed Ukrainian offensive might not, might peter out by this time tomorrow. The Russians might decide we don't need to do anything yet. We would prefer to keep bleeding the U.S. economy. I couldn't believe the prices of deodorant at Publix. It was like $7.99. It's not that expensive in Switzerland. It's half that price in the UK. Unbelievable. Sam Freeman sends a super chat. Thank you. He says, recent articles about high-speed torpedoes and missiles. Attack on U.S. Navy fires up MAGA. Yeah, that is a possibility. I've always said that I thought the key moment would be the sinking of one or more U.S. carriers. U.S. carriers are the primary symbol of U.S. power in the world. Submarines may actually be the real source of their power, but from a perception point of view, the carriers are the icons. And so I think that it's either going to be an attack on a major U.S. city, or it's going to be the sinking of one or more carriers. I'll be super suspicious if it happens to be the two oldest carriers that are already outmoded and not terribly useful. If they're supposedly sunk by, hypersonic Russian missiles, I will assume that's a false flag. Also, I think the reason I mentioned specifically the UK carrier getting sunk is because in a false flag is because it's almost useless. I mean, I don't think they even have many planes on it at all. So that would be, if they got rid of two old U.S. carriers plus the new British carrier, that wouldn't harm the NATO's combat capabilities at all, and it might be enough to stir up at least a portion of the MAGA base. Kitty B says, I love Unauthorized, have not been on in a while. Is it still around? Yes, it is. The chat is live. There's actually been a number of super chats already, and it's rolling. Russian passports floating in the water will really seal the deal. Yeah, they usually include passports when with their missiles. You wouldn't want to fire a missile without the proper passport, right? Anyhow, so phase 2 may have begun. The NATO-Ukrainian offensive supposedly has begun. Stop by the blog tomorrow. I'll be posting, keeping up with it, more or less. And we'll probably discuss this again tomorrow night. I'm Vox Day, and this is the Darkstream.